What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Crypto World Radio. My name is King Wabi, and today's episode of Crypto World Radio is sponsored by Noah's Protocol. They're a non-custodial crypto lending app with sustainable tokenomics and unique feature for borrowers. It offers loans that are under collateralized with financing up to 150% without the risk of liquidation through its lease solution. And I want to welcome you guys to today's episode. Here we have Saito Network and also one of their founders here up on the space, and also Dow Chemist. So what we're going to be discussing here on this space is what they're building with their blockchain technology, fundamentals, and all things tokenomics. And essentially, what they're building is serving a multitude of economic problems that have caused incentive issues in the past, such as the tragedy of the commons, free rider problems, and also economic attacks. And they have a pretty unique consensus mechanism that combines both proof of work and proof of stake. So we're gonna dive into that. That's something that I've never really come across. So that's going to be pretty interesting. And they also have a built-in incentive system where developers can create dApps that reward users for participating in the network, encouraging the actual adoption and use case of said platform. So we're going to be doing a deep dive, guys, into their tech and discussing how they're going to be positioning themselves as a key player in the decentralized world of all things digital assets. And as always, you guys can catch a replay of the space up our hold on, let me invite Grit. You can catch a replay of our spaces up on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I want to welcome you guys. Thank you all so much. And if you guys can, please retweet the space. Please retweet the live link so we can get more people involved. Always love having more community members and all that stuff. But before we get started, Dal, do you still see Saito Network as a co-host? And do you see Gritcult as a speaker? Because on my end, it's still showing that they're in the process of connecting.
Yeah, I see Saito as a co-host, and I only see Richard as a fellow speaker.
Okay. Um, I think it might be a connection issue on my end. So give me 1 second, guys. I'm gonna leave the space real quick and then re-enter right back. So just a heads up, Mr. Producer. Just a heads up. And also please bring Gritcult up as a speaker. I'll be back in a few seconds, guys.
In the meantime, Sato, how's it going?
I'll hop in. I know Nova's a little bit indisposed. Really good. It's a kind of interesting windy morning. It's 9 a.m. where I'm at. So a little bit chilly, but glad to be here.
I hear that. I think King Wubby is back. Hopefully, without any connection issues.
All right, cool. All right, we're back. Just outside at the current moment. How's everyone doing?
Really well, thanks.
Awesome. Dow, how are you doing today, brother?
Doing great, man. I was hosting a space earlier this morning, but I really wanted to catch up on First Republic. I don't know if you guys have the TLDR, but looks like another bank went by the dust. So interesting times.
Yeah, it definitely proves like the use case for all things digital assets. Same thing happened in March, and also a few years ago with the Bank of Cyprus, if you guys remember that stuff.
Yep.
Gritcult, how are you doing today, brother? Thanks for coming up, man.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Been a long, crazy day, but productive and busy, which is good. It's good to be busy. Yeah, man, excited to talk with these guys and let's chop it up.
All right, awesome. All right, so let's get started, man. Let's get started. Well, it's conference week, really conference season. We're in the heat of it. We got things like consensus coming up, and I know Nova had hit me up about last week to talk, to talk about Saito. So that's what we're gonna get into. So first off, Harry, I want to welcome you, brother. And the first thing that I'd really like to know, brother, is where exactly does Saito come from? It's a pretty unique name.
Hello.
and I'm sure there's a cool story
Hey, Wabi, you broke up for like the last 5-10 seconds.
behind that.
Yeah, I
So
think I think I can take that as like, yeah. So yeah, basically, I mean, I think given the name of the sort of overall space, kick off by saying I've been a Bitcoiner for a very long time, and that's really where Saito originates. So I was around the Beijing Bitcoin scene in like got involved in 2013, along with my co-founder David Lancashire, who was also kind of working in tech in China at the time. And got super excited when I saw Bitcoin. I kind of came from an open source software and tech background, so my kind of take on Bitcoin was like, wow, man, there's this like network. And I think the way I saw it is the way people talk about, sound money now, I saw it as like the potential for sound data before the money part. I was like, wow, you've got this network where you got no middlemen, no intermediaries, no one can mess with your shit. This is really interesting. It's different. And I think particularly living in China, where you see the risks of not having access to that kind of network, made it even more exciting for me. But obviously 2014, 15, 16, we started to see like block size wars and a lot of fighting in the Bitcoin community. I saw a lot of friends who really cared follow different paths in the Bitcoin space into SV and what became SV into BCH and then SV. And these were people who really cared about the kind of Bitcoin mission, but had different ideas about how to execute it. And I think looking at that, one of the things that became clear really to my co-founder and to me was that those problems are intractable. If you're trying to do certain things with Bitcoin, you get stuck. And it's around scaling and around incentivizing your high capacity network. And we set out to build something that, it owes a huge amount to Bitcoin. The basic blockchain structure is very, very Bitcoin. It's just a consensus that's different. And the consensus is designed to solve these stresses you get in the network when a lot of people want to use it or when they want to put a lot of data into the network. That's kind of the origin story, and we can get into a little bit about how we do that and why it changes things and why it's important a bit later maybe. But the name is from Saito, the character in Inception, the movie, which is a favorite of my co-founders and mine. And it was kind of like a code name. It was just what we were calling things, and then we never changed it. It kind of stuck. So there's a lot of Inception memes and references actually in the white paper and other places. But that's kind of the postage stamp where Saito comes from.
Sick, man. So I know currently right now there's the blockchain trilemma, which is I'm assuming that you were touching upon, right? We have scalability, security, and also decentralization, right? And
Yeah.
it's something that's deemed as a problem, right? If you can mute, brother, I think there's some like background noise coming from your end, brother. But yeah, currently right now the blockchain trilemma is an issue really with most experts that dive into things that I have no experience in, like coding and developing front ends and all that stuff. So I wanted to know how you guys are solving that issue, right? And also, it's pretty fascinating to know what you guys are building as far as combining both POW and POS. And if you can tell us a little bit more about that mechanism and the advantages of it compared to other blockchain networks, would love to hear it, man. Would love to know that, man. Always excited to interact with people that are building out new ecosystems in the digital asset space.
Cool. So let's keep going with the movie thing. A bit like the kid in the Matrix. There is no trilemma. It's one of those things that exists if you're trying to change things in POW or POS systems. And the problem there is you've got this thing to balance where the consensus mechanism pays for security. So mining or staking pays purely for securing the network. And then you've got this issue of, given that's where all the money's going, how do you ensure decentralization and security? Decentralization and openness. So you've got this problem where if you could change that, the whole problem goes away. And I think that people are locked into this mindset because POW and POS do what they do, that you have to give all the money to the security mechanism, right? And the problem there is, you just don't get enough cash into the system to pay for nodes, et cetera, to actually, run and operate if you're going to put any stress on them. The Bitcoin solution, the BTC solution, is really simple, and it makes sense within a space, which is to say, well, we'll constrain the network. We'll say we won't scale beyond a certain size, and we'll ensure the decentralization part, the openness part, by having a volunteer group of people who are dedicated to the cause provide all the nodes. So you're running a node at home is a kind of, it was a huge thing. Can you run it on a Raspberry Pi? It was a huge thing with the BTC, the core crowd in Bitcoin, when they were starting to kind of split apart about how to scale. And that's the way to do it. Is just say, well, look, we'll realize that there's a limit here, but we'll just have to rely on volunteers. And actually, Ethereum does basically the same thing. It says, well, we want to be a larger scale network with more going on, with lots of smart contract processing, etc. So the volunteer they bring in is consensus, right? Who are Infura, who are providing most people's actual access to the Ethereum network. So most people don't connect directly to the Ethereum network, run a node, and actually, send transactions onto the network. They use an API. So for most of the time when you're using a DApp or something theoretically decentralized on Ethereum, you're still going through the single provider, right? So Infura looks a bit like Google or Facebook or whoever, who provides you an API, easy to write apps for that, and then they handle putting that data on and off chain. That's something we kind of don't want to do. We want to avoid. But we also want to scale beyond what Bitcoin has agreed to kind of limit itself to, where they're trying to scale just the cash aspect with something like Lightning. And the way we do that is we say, well, you have to rethink consensus. You can't give all the money to security and only security. But the question is, how do you do that and make a secure blockchain? That's the heart of Saito. And the way we do that is, instead of using mining or staking or something where you're using an external cost, we make our work function, what makes it hard to make a block, transaction fees themselves. And that small change completely changes the structure of your blockchain. It means there's no 51% attack. It means there's no trilemma. It just doesn't exist. Because as you get more people using the network, fee flow goes up, and it pays for more capacity, for more scale, and it pays for more nodes to operate, for more decentralization. If you do it right, and that's where these aspects of proof of work and proof of stake come in, making sure people can't cheat, and we borrow ideas from both proof of work and proof of stake to help build the mechanism. But the primary difference in Saito is, instead of mining, you're burning electricity to hash, or instead of locking people's money up under threat of staking, the lifeblood of the Saito network, what pays people in the network, not block producers, but the entire network, is rewards paid in fees that came from users. And specifically, money gets paid to people who helped, who can demonstrably help bring user transactions into blocks. And there's a lot of kind of stuff I could talk about there, but that's the big difference, because then if anyone wants to attack the network, they have to use real fees. They have to pay in Saito that they have to get from somewhere. So even if they're trying to cheat you, what they have to do is pay you in fees to do it. And that makes Saito incredibly secure. I think I've been rambling for a bit, so I'm not sure if you wanted to restate a question or if I should just go straight into kind of what we're building, what we're doing.
I actually want to throw it over to Dow Chemist because I understand that most of his expertise comes from the Ethereum side of things, specifically Layer 2, and then we'll move on over to Grit. I think I rambled on long enough during the introduction and all that stuff. But yeah, man, feel free to go as technical and non-technical if you'd like, man. So Dow, man, I'll throw it over to you. If there's something that you want to throw into Richard's way, man, feel free to do so, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, for that great introduction. I think that's always great to hear from the engineers and to understand the model that they have for what a blockchain should be, right? And I think it's interesting the point that you made that you don't want all the fees of value to go towards simply security. It sounds like you want to better align the activity on the chain and the growth of the chain, and directly reward those who participate in the growth of the chain, right? So,
That's right.
so I'd like to know, like, from your point of view, right, as Webby's saying, I'm more of on the Eve side of thing. What type of applications or services do you think will or are already happening on Saito that don't make sense on Ether or not necessarily better suited for Ether, and it just make way more sense for Saito? Is there like specific use cases that you think the Saito chain is just better made for?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's not to like can people and what they're working on. I think we just introduce a whole lot of new things that become radically possible, where you wouldn't even really want to or think of doing them either on Bitcoin or Ethereum. So yeah, we've got a lot of things where the obvious case is, ETH smart contracts generally are really good for DeFi, right? But ETH is a very expensive way of actually sending just messages to each other, right? Why would you want to send messages on chain? Well, two reasons. One is to have cryptographic evidence of what's going on and to be able to secure the channel. There's lots of ways you can do that, but what the blockchain gives you at the same time is universal broadcast, right? That's that feature of Bitcoin where when you first use it, I don't know who else had this feeling on the podcast, but on the space, but that first time you made a payment and you realize there's nobody in between, right? Like I sent money and I sent it to the recipient. I sent it to my friend. There was no intermediary. I didn't have to ask permission. I didn't have to use username and password, right? I just sent my money to my friend. And it's that feeling, right? And that's because any Bitcoin address can send money to any other Bitcoin address, right? It's universal broadcast. Anyone on the network. So if you've got an address, you can message it. That's really cool. But that means, if you're doing sharding, for instance, that gets really complicated because not every address is on every shard. How do you find each other? You get these extra problems. So for stuff like DeFi, where you want simple things calculated on every node, ETH really solid. I think there are issues with like how people connect to that network, but ETH does a good job. Smart contracts would have a place in layer twos on Saito too. But there's a different kind of application design where you just send normal, regular application messages over the chain, which allow you to do all sorts of things. So we started with games because they're a great no risk space. If your game blows up, it's not the end of the world. To start building out these really complicated, genuinely peer-to-peer applications. There's two people on the network interacting with each other, no intermediaries. There's not even a house managing a deck of cards or whatever. That's all being done between the people on the network. You can do that for games, but that then expands out to all sorts of things. So right now, I've been spending a bit of time polishing up like a video call, like Zoom application on Saito. You can come and use it for free. It's encrypted, it's anonymous, peer-to-peer, right? Because you can use the blockchain to manage the connections between two people. So if you've got an address and I've got an address, we can talk to each other. Nothing anyone can do about it. You don't have those central points where you're using someone's relay server that could get shut down, et cetera, et cetera. At the very least, you can fall back to the blockchain, communicate where you are on the internet, and establish the call that way. So those are the kinds of things where no one wants to do that on Ethereum. Right? It's going to be very expensive because $12 or something to start a call because you have to send multiple transactions. It's going to take a while. You want a different kind of blockchain to do those things. And that's really what we're trying to do is provide Web3 with a different application model that's not smart contracts. It's peer-to-peer applications using the PKI network that is the blockchain to establish connections, to share important data that needs to be encrypted, and to find each other, do things like locate each other on other networks to establish connections there. So I think that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, it does. That's really cool, especially the video example that you mentioned. Another thing that might I'd like some clarification, right? So you mentioned that on Saito you don't necessarily have the notion of smart contract, right? And I know from the documentation that you guys enable people that code in different languages. What does that look like for a developer who wants to build Web3 on top of Saito? Like what are the steps to add an app on Saito?
So it's very different. We're actually making it a lot simpler in some ways, in that we've just released WASM library of like the core Saito engine. So one of the things with writing an app on Saito is you're essentially running a mini node or a light node inside your browser, your phone, wherever the app resides, right? And it's connecting to the chain. It's not connecting to a service provider like Infura that then gives you access, right? So you're actually on chain. And that sounds more complicated, but actually it's just removing a layer. So the way applications work on Saito is you have a message field in the transaction and you can put what you like in there. So you and I could write an app where we just create our own version of Signal, a completely secret messenger, right? Where your end and my end know our encryption style. We don't tell anybody. We just start sending each other messages encrypted across the network. No one can tell what's going on because they don't even know what we're encrypting, how we're encrypting it. They just see, stuff going past. That's actually really easy to do on Saito because all you need to do is be able to put, grab an encryption library, push the message into it, and send it to the other person. There's some interesting things, but there's examples, challenges or examples in the code base now about how to do that, like doing a key exchange, right? So when we set up cryptography, I need to say, here's my public key, you respond, I send you a message back, and then we can set up encryption without a third party, vouching for us or controlling us. Once you've done that, it's really, really simple. And that means you don't need the whole ETH stack of Ganesh and Truffle and all of those things. You're basically just developing to a simple API that says, send this message. Send it to this address, send it to multiple addresses. And then obviously there's a few little things like, because transactions need fees, you need to add those and manage those. But again, that's quite a simple API.
So, Richard, I want to throw something in your direction, brother. I understand that you guys are building on Substrate, which is the Polkadot programming language. What are some of the key pros of building on Substrate versus something like Solidity?
So actually, we're not. We're compatible with that. We have interfaces to Dot because we kind of collaborated with them with a Web3 grant to build a generic Web3 gaming engine, peer-to-peer gaming engine. But no, we're not using Substrate actually. So that might just be a misunderstanding.
Yeah, that was my understanding of. Good to know that, man. There's not many. There aren't really many virtual machines that connect to both Dot and ETH at the moment. Am I correct on that?
That is correct. We're not a VM, so we don't have a VM on the network. That's one of the advantages for Saito in that when you're writing the kind of applications that we're doing, it's not a replacement for smart contracts and where you'd want that. But there's a huge number of things that people are trying to do with smart contracts that are just really hard to do and not really appropriate, right? Because smart contracts great for creating a token. It's a brilliant way to create a token. It's a great way to do something like a DEX. But if you wanted to say just run poker, then no one's going to build poker into smart contracts and think it's going to be viable, right? What you want is users to have software and to cryptographically agree things like the state of a deck in messages, right? Not to execute everything on chain. You do want to say, perhaps use a smart contract to settle or to do escrow, something like that. So the way we see things is, it's possible to grab, say, the ETH VM, etc., and put that in the layer 2 on Saito if you want to do that. But for us, Saito should be really lean, really light, because it's designed to handle a lot of data moving very, very quick. So we're not doing execution on the node in the way that a smart contract blockchain does. It's peer-to-peer messaging. And that's something that takes devs a little bit to adapt to, because it's kind of something that most people have thrown their hands up and said, that's just too hard. You can't really do it. And, we've really taken that on. A lot of what we've built and what's, kind of been involved in the process of building out Saito has been working out these techniques. Like, I use the example of cards, right? There's ways of you and me doing a card deal without there being a deck of cards or a central authority who's verifying that work, where we can shuffle and deal and play a game. But that takes some engineering to actually get the cryptography executed to allow us to do that. That's where the equivalent of the smart contract thinking is in Saito. It's in how do I use cryptography to share information, for instance, like that a deck of cards is provably in a certain order, but without revealing what the cards are until we share keys to reveal each card. And so it's a bit of a different style of programming when you're doing things like that.
I'm going to pass it over to Grit now. I'm going to pass it over to Grit. Grit, are you able to hear me, brother?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
I am having a plethora of connections issues today. It keeps showing most people up on the panel as connecting, and there's really nothing bad on my end. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop off. But Grit, if you can hear me, I'll pass it on over to you, brother.
All right, thank you. So I mean, it was super interesting hearing about the genesis of Saito. I think the history of blockchain development is super interesting. I remember when the whole kind of forking thing happened with Bitcoin Cash
Yeah.
and then Satoshi's vision. So, and I have people in those fields as well, and how divided they were at the time. So, my question is really like, where do you kind of foresee the future of different blockchains, and do you kind of see them going to application specific blockchains, or do you kind of see it as everything will be Ethereum and then we'll kind of interact with that? Where do you see it going?
It's a really interesting question because one thing I've learned in the space is like don't make predictions too broadly, because the level of innovation change just like makes you wrong half the time. But I think what we'll see is some consolidation, and I think, for instance, just going back to Bitcoin as the kind of original case and an interesting case study. I do worry that Bitcoin has unresolved issues that will compound over time. I still love Bitcoin to death, and I still hold Bitcoin, but there is a very real question of for how long, when halvenings are reducing the amount of security and fees are not creeping up at a rate that could do anything like secure the network. And that's, that to me is a real concern. Am I predicting that Bitcoin will go to zero tomorrow because of this problem? No. So, it's something I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the amount of effort in that community going towards solving. But, it's not causing fires today. I think where we see more issues are things like, Infura, et cetera. And I think we'll see some black swan kind of events where things just fail. Like if you imagine if Infura shut its doors and turned the servers off tomorrow, the industry would be far worse off than if we lost 3 more banks. Just because the majority of what we think of as the decentralized Web3 space is transacting across those servers. Those servers are the gateway to the Ethereum chain for 90% of users. And so USDC, USDT, all those things would essentially become unusable on ETH. And Tron and BSC are not going to take up the slack in a hurry because there aren't bridges and stuff working. So it's a really big issue. So I think those are sort of the pitfalls I see in front of us. In terms of future shape, I think really it's so hard to say because I get up in the morning, I work on Saito, I do a few other things maybe during the day, work on Saito some more, go to bed. So I am really focused on what we're doing. And I think in terms of innovations in the space, I think things like use of ZKs, etc., zero knowledge proofs will be will change things in ways similar to smart contracts as they become, really affordable to do on most chains. But I think something like Saito comes along and can really change that game because it's got the space. It's got the, if you want to use it, deploy a zero knowledge proof of something, you can put 120, K of data in a transaction if it's worth it to you. And so those are the places I'm excited about, and I'm sort of trying to, seeing the future. And I think with proper high capacity routing work blockchains like Saito on the ground, we'll see capacity that will move people away from single use chains because they're just naturally constrained. They're not that useful any more than for doing something like running a massive multiplayer game decentralized or something like that.
Yeah, that was an interesting point that you on. If Uniswap were to go down, it would actually like be a lot worse than if a couple of banks were to go down. Brother, if you can mute, by the way, man, there's some feedback coming your way.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a lot better, man. Yeah, but I agree with that statement. If things like Uniswap were to go down, I think like the implosion in the market would just be so.
Well, it would be broader than that, because if Infura went down, Trust Wallet, most of the networks out there would go down. So you'd also lose 1inch Sushi, everything, right? Pancake would stop because that's on BSC. But,
Yeah,
you wouldn't just lose Uniswap. You'd use all these dApps that we think of as independent and, not relying on anyone at the infrastructure level are. And I think that's a real danger point for the industry that people haven't seen. Like, the Uniswap servers don't have a failover for somebody else's APIs, as far as I know. I'm pretty sure they don't. I haven't actually inspected the code. But yeah, what happens when Infura goes down? So it kind of keeps me awake at night sometimes.
and pardon if this sounds like a question that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but do you believe things like Layer Zero technologies, right, like with what Layer Zero Labs is doing, do you think that can mitigate any sort of potential risk of that occurring?
I kind of applaud the effort, but I see the problem as intractable in a different place. And again, obviously coming from a Saito perspective here, but the problem there is to do with the economic incentives in proof of work and proof of stake. And in the end, because everything's going to security, what you have is consensus paid for, but everything else is still Web 2. It hasn't moved on because it's not going to move on just because, right? To move to a different model, we need different economics because it's economics that built Web 2. It's economics that means that there's one Facebook and one Google, right? That's the natural way of things when you have these centralizing pressures because of market forces. So it's very hard to create new competitors to Infura to service ETH just on the basis that they should exist, right? You need to be economically competitive.
Yeah.
And Infura isn't. It's still subsidized.
Yes. So would you say something like Blockstream, which is pretty much in control of the majority of the Lightning Network? Would you say that's a good comparison, right? Because I consider Bitcoin and everything like outside of ETH to be completely different asset classes, right? You have Bitcoin, then you have crypto, right? I'm a fan of both, huge fan of both, right? But there are some similarities, right, with Bitcoin and the whole Lightning Network and all that stuff, and some omni layered stuff. That's probably going to be known as Bitcoin DeFi, and their whole NFT stuff with ordinals, right? Eventually, Bitcoin could eventually have a layer that's sort of a knockoff on Ethereum. I don't think the talent pool that section of the Bitcoin ecosystem, I don't think it's ever going to be as good as what we have on Ethereum. But I think a good comparison would be, whatever Infura is to Ethereum, you can kind of make that same case with Blockstream and Bitcoin, as far as like the other layers to Bitcoin is concerned, outside of just like regular transactions. What are your thoughts on that, brother?
Totally agree. And I think it comes down to the same reason I was just saying before, right? Another way to think about it maybe is we're in a decentralized space, right? And we're in a space of trustlessness and nobody having power over anybody else. So the only force left that directs behavior is economic, right? People might have beliefs. So they might run a node because they believe in the network, like they believe that Bitcoin should exist. But they're not going to run that if it costs $2,000 a day or 15 grand a day to run it, right? People are just going to give up at some point. So economics really becomes the last place there. And if you look at Lightning, there's some really clever tech solutions to problems, but they're kind of artificial problems because it's not solving the question of what's my incentive to run a node, right? And is that aligned? And it isn't overall, because if you have a box or if you have a big provider, they become more efficient to use. Other people prefer to use them because they're more efficient. And so you end up with a solo provider running all of what's supposed to be a decentralized network. And I think that's the issue universally. So if you look at a space like Polkadot, and I've worked with a lot of groups who were parachain slot winners, and they started to build, etc. And the first problem they all hit, right? Because they're all mostly ex-Ethereum space devs. Like you point out, that's where that big pool of experienced developers is. So they're building away on Substrate. They build their contracts and everything like that. Then they want to throw up an app onto the actual internet for users to use, and they kind of, reach like your experienced mechanic. You reach into your toolkit, you get your hand on the right wrench without looking. They reach for Infura, and then they reach around in the toolbox, and it's just not there. And then they're stumped. How do we do this? We have to run our own nodes, right, at cost. And all of a sudden, that DApp ain't looking so profitable. And this is the I think a universal problem in the space, and it's one we're trying to address. Is how do you build it so that instead of plowing money into these purely security focused things where it essentially leaks out of the network, how do we build something that provides the infrastructure and that pays people for providing user facing infrastructure in a way that also produces the security? So I think that's a kind of universal problem in the space, and there are lots of different attempts to get around it. But an interesting way to think about it is find the volunteer, right? Because usually there's someone in the space who's volunteering or subsidizing costs, and if you can find that, you can get to the heart of where the problem is. Because if they go away, that network breaks, and there's no financial incentive necessary to replace them.
Tal, if you want to chime in, bro, go on ahead, brother.
Yeah, I'm listening. I'm taking it all in because I think that emphasis on decentralization is well taken, right? The general issue, if you're an end user and it comes to decentralization, you don't see the benefits of it until something stop working, right? It's like no one really cares about how MetaMask is being built or if there's some centralization point until MetaMask prevents you from using it, right? So I think it's one of those things that's the developers are the one that have to make those considerations because maybe sophisticated end users will understand the trade-offs and will pick the chains or where to do their financial activity on based on that, but the average user probably can't get to a place where they can compare all the different factors around the decentralization and be able to make a difference between or distinction between all the different blockchains that exist, right? Do you think is that like a likely thing to happen for adoption? Is that as chains that have points to centralized point of failure phase those failures, the developers start to learn the best practices and start to move towards the chain that actually do follow best practices and from the get-go are more decentralized than others?
Well, I think like to follow up on your point, I think a great thing is we talk about openness rather than decentralization as being this defining factor, right? Most people want that decentralization because they want openness. They want non-excludability. No one can keep you out, right? If you want to transact on Bitcoin, you can, right? No one can lock you off. Same with Ethereum. That's the point that people want from that decentralization, right? And the problem with openness is you don't know it's failed until you're locked out, right? So for a lot of users, unless you're looking at the fundamentals, yeah, I'm using Uniswap today. I'm using Uniswap tomorrow. I used Uniswap yesterday. It seems to be working, but they're not actually realizing, well, there's about 5 ways that can get shut down and it's not open, right? It's suddenly locked off to you and you don't have, the ability to access no matter what. So I think it'll be a big factor in moving forwards, is these glitches or issues. But I think actually more than that, the bigger factor will be cost, right? Because that's something that people will react to. And a good example is just if people are doing stuff in a smart contract that could be done with a regular application, it's just sending encrypted messages, then it's much more expensive to run via the smart contract. And if we're talking mass adoption, not the likes of us who are going to use and try stuff and be motivated to stay decentralized, etc. People are just going to say, well, if this is costing $60, a session, I'm not going to do it. And so that's, I think, going to be the bigger force. And people will, I think, over time, migrate to the space that is the most logical. And it's the same with like what goes on chain and what goes off chain. As cost comes into it, people will, and application developers will make judicious choices about how do they, send user data. Like once you and I are connected with swap keys, I can send you data off chain, right? Very cheaply, totally encrypted. No one else can read it. It's secure. So, where do I want it on chain for like guaranteeing deliverability, et cetera? And where am I happy to just, if it's a stream, send it to you direct? And I think in the end, developers, don't have a super amount of choices right now, but that's changing. And it'll be developers seeing opportunities both to profit from better development environments and to provide better products, better code, better, in the end, experiences via different options. So I think it'll be a combination. I think we'll see some of these issues biting and people taking notice, but I think much more we'll just see people going where the cool shit is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear it from the engineers, right? Like to you guys, it's so clear that the consequences of the trade offs are right around the corner, and the idea that for users it's a lot cheaper, makes a lot of sense for adoption. So I guess the way I would look at it is, what Saito is really saying is that for developers who understand the difference between a closed system or points of failures versus a very open system, over a long period of time, they'll tend to pick the second one, right? So that's their benefit. And then the benefit for end users is that the network that you guys are providing will be cheaper because it's peer to peer, right? And I guess
Yep.
like another thing is also, if you're a developer, you don't have to wrap your mind around the concept of smart contract. You can just deploy your app, and just to make sure I understand it. So you deploy your app on your local validator, and then you become a validated part of the network. Is that how it works as an app developer?
Nope. So there's no validators. It's just nodes, and you deploy an app however you like. You put it in an app store. People download the app. It needs to know a node to connect to, and then it's on the network. The app is a node. There's no separation of powers there because we don't want this closure, right? So basically, a node is going to make money for connecting to you. So a provider out there, any node wants to connect to you, so they'll advertise themselves. You can connect to 2 or 3 nodes, and your wallet can see who's providing the cheapest fee. Off you go. There's no separation like that. You don't need to be deployed onto the network via a validator or anything like that. Your app can just create a Saito transaction, send it.
Full send, man. Full send, bro. This is a very interesting conversation. I want to thank everyone that's participating within this conversation at the current moment. Some pretty quality stuff, man. Some very quality stuff here. And yeah, I want to thank everyone for participating and all that stuff. Great. If there's anything else that you want to add, brother, feel free to do so, man.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to the Saito guys. Yeah, so one last question I'll probably ask is, you know, what are the benefits for, builders wanting to build on Saito?
So I think the biggest thing is, this guy makes an example of the video chat we've put on there. It gives you a whole lot of different things you could even think of building in new ways, right? So it gives you, a simple way of having users use keys to access, etc. But you can also use, build applications that require a lot more data being sent to and fro. So it's a very different application space. The biggest is you can just write applications that send, format and send Saito transactions. And it's really very simple. There's no smart contract learning, et cetera, et cetera. So for those set of things, it's just going to be a much easier path. The other side of it is that nodes on Saito network, like think of them as miners or whatever, but they don't make money just for existing. They need to attract user fee flow. So there's value in that to them. So there's also value to the developer, because if they are creating a lot of traffic, that's something that provides value to the network. So they can offer that out. They can offer their app to be provided to people in exchange for getting their fee flow. And that's something that you don't necessarily have. You have to add a fee as such in Ethereum space to get a revenue stream out of your Uniswap or whatever. Whereas in this case, you can still do that if you want to, but you could also essentially vend the fee flow that's coming, because if you can generate user transactions in the Saito network, that's the most valuable thing. That's like having hash. So it creates a competitive marketplace to build applications that people want to use, because that's what the network needs. That's what infrastructure providers need to make money, is that fee flow. So different model. As people start seeing it in action, I think it'll pick up and start to feel like the way to do a whole suite of application styles that really don't exist that much at the moment, that are more akin to traditional apps that people don't think can be decentralized, like social.
Richard, I noticed that you mentioned hash, and throughout this conversation, it seems like your primary focus is on self-sufficiency and decentralization, which I commend you for. And I'd be really curious to know more about the hash power lottery system that you guys are implementing, and how that ensures that only honest nodes are rewarded for the contributions to the network. If you can describe that in a non-technical fashion, I know it's a bit of a of a
It's my
question,
job,
sort of like
man.
a curveball. If it like sort of like a curveball there, but if you can describe it in a non-technical fashion,
Yeah, thanks.
would love that.
Thanks for switching pitches in the middle of the night for me. Yeah. The best way to understand this is, well, I'll just quickly explain the kind of the rest of the network, what's going on, so we understand the problem. Right? When someone makes a block, we've signed each person who's handled that transaction between the user's machine and the machine that made the block, anyone in the network. That leaves a trail. We cryptographically sign it. So when we finish making the block, we're going to inspect all those transactions and see all the nodes that signed all the transactions inside that block, right? So we're going to say, all of you guys helped make this block. So we're going to pay all of you guys for doing that, because that's what Saito does. It pays the network for getting the transactions into the block. Problem is, if we obviously split up the fees between everybody who touched a transaction, we're possibly going to create more transactions paying everyone than than there were in the original block, and the thing's going to go nuclear, right? Because you've got more payment transactions running around than in the original block. So what we say is, we'll pay one person who helped, but we'll pay them in proportion to the amount that they helped. So their chance of winning all the fees is their percentage that they contributed to making the block. So if you did 90% of the work and I did 10% of the work, then we're going to run a lottery that gives you a 90% chance, a mere 10% chance of winning all the money in the block. And like Bitcoin money, if we just keep doing that, it's fair, right? We get a 90-10 split, and that's the work we're doing. Everybody's happy. Slight note, advantage here, having more than 51% doesn't help you, right? You still get 90-10, you get 99-1. Really nice system that way. But the lottery system comes in, well, how do we run this lottery? And we need a way that you can't cheat to pick a random number that you can't predict. Right? And the way we do that is we say, well, we're going to run a competition to find a hash, a bit like Bitcoin, that is much smaller. And that is going to have to match up with a number in the block, right, to create a new random number you can't have predicted to decide who gets paid out, right? And so essentially create a number of tickets. In the previous example, you get 9 tickets, I get 1. And then we need to create a random number. And then we basically count along that random number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a huge random number. And the place where it stops, if we get my ticket first and then count your tickets and start with me again, that's the person who wins. So it's just a little competition that means if you pay people just enough that when they find an answer that pays someone in the network, right, they want to take that payment, right? Instead of keeping money and trying to find a ticket that pays themselves and cheat, then you've got a fair system, unpredictable lottery for choosing who gets paid out for this block. And you need to be able to do that quite quickly. So we've kind of borrowed the idea of the hash competition, but it's not hashing, like you could hash in your browser. It's not hashing in the kind of size and scope that you see in Bitcoin. It's just a way of finding a random number, getting a small reward for that, in a way that it's just enough of a reward so that you won't hide your correct result and keep going until you find one that's better for you, because you're in competition with other people who'll find a result sooner, and then they'll just get their payment for that and you'll get nothing. So does that explain it? It's kind of, that's the real 30,000 view on it.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was a pretty cool description, man. Thank you so much for that. Some pretty cool stuff. So what do you guys have in line for the rest of the year as far as roadmap and all that stuff?
I mean, the biggest thing for us, as always, is getting these ideas out there. I mean, we were talking today about what makes people shift in the space. And, we're kind of very much Bitcoiny in that sense. It's going to be a movement of people who care about these fundamentals who'll provide the backbone. We're not going to, anything that's a hype machine or just like pumps us crazy is going to deflate and ruin what we're trying to build. So we're long haul, building a movement that understand the value of these peer-to-peer applications and what they can be. And that's really our primary focus, is getting these fundamental messages out, building a community that understands them and wants to be part of something. At the same time, right now, we're in the process of testing moving the application core from, for JavaScript applications away from JavaScript into using the WASM payload written in Rust. So we kind of put Rust nodes on the network earlier this year. Now we're getting that light node I was talking about, capable software in Rust into the browser. That's really key to making things performant. And that'll be a great boost for developers, because that'll just be an include, right? So they just include this payload, and now they've got Saito capability in their app. And then over summer, we're hoping to have embedded that and be looking at actually moving towards what we're calling token permanence, which is guaranteeing balances on the network, rather than having a network that may be reset as can occur now. And that's really a key moment for when value starts accruing on the network. So we'll be talking to people over summer about how that's coming along and expected dates, etc.
Awesome, man. Well, dude, I want to thank you so much for this amazing discussion. We touched on what you're building, and also sort of your views in the dev side of things, in the market. We talked all things security and decentralization and all that stuff, and some pretty cool points that we touched upon, such as Infura and how that's the backbone of Ethereum, and sort of the cons about that, and same thing with BTC and all that sort of stuff. And I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. Shout out to our sponsor again for Crypto World Radio, Knowledge Protocol. And it would mean the world. It mean the world to me, guys. If you're new to these spaces, if you can follow us here at Because Bitcoin, every single follow counts. And also, want to give a shout out to Grit Cult for being the co-host of this space. Twitter Spaces have been very, very, very ruggy to me, which is odd because I I go on Spaces sometimes behind the Because Bitcoin account, and I had no issues with that today. but it seems on my end on this specific profile, I was having issues, so wasn't able to co-host as I needed to be. But shout out to Grit Cult for that, and also for Dow Chemist for participating on this panel. Guys, you can catch us tomorrow for our first spaces. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to be hosting TED Talks Macro. Pretty excited for that space, and we're also going to be joined by Dimension XYZ in that conversation through more like the end of that. They're going to be joining us, so we're going to be having a mega space, and once Dimension comes in, we're going to talk about blockchain modularity and all that stuff. So look forward to that, and you can catch a replay of this space within a few, pretty much within the first minute that the space is concluded on our YouTube channel and also here on Twitter. It is being recorded. So thank you guys so much. Feel free to follow us. My name is Wabi. I do these spaces all the time. Keep up with us by turning on bell notifications, and we'll see you on the next one. Shout out to everybody, and thank you so much again to Saito Network and Richard. Catch you later, guys, and we'll see you on the next one. God bless you and take care.
Pleasure.